Hi, Film Loom here. Today, I'm going to explain a horror war movie called Under the Shadow. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie opens a few years after the Iranian Revolution, during the ongoing Iraq-Iran War, one of the longest and bloodiest conflicts in human history. In Tehran, a young mother named Shidai is having a conversation with the dean of a medical college. Shidai had previously left her studies behind due to political unrest and her marriage, but now she wants to restart her career and fulfill her lifelong dream of becoming a doctor. However, the dean informs her that it's impossible for her to be admitted due to her active participation in political rallies when she was a student. Feeling defeated, Shidai returns to her apartment complex, where she lives with her daughter, Dorsa, and several other families. She had left Dorsa in the care of her downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Fuker, an elderly woman. When Shidai goes to collect her daughter, Mrs. Fuker notices her emotional state and comforts her with a hug, telling her not to lose hope. Later that evening, Shidai places all her course books into a plastic bag, unable to look at them now that her dreams of becoming a doctor seem impossible. Among the books is a physiology textbook her mother had given her when she first got into medical school, with a handwritten message of encouragement on the first page. Shidai locks the book in her bedside drawer and places the key on top of a cupboard. Soon after, her husband, Iraj, returns home after a long day at work. It's revealed that he's also a doctor and was Shidai's classmate in medical school. She shares everything that happened earlier with him, and together they face the harsh reality of her situation. Barely holding back her tears, Shidai feels hurt by her husband Iraj's comment about not continuing her studies. He's sympathetic but suggests that it might be better for their family if she doesn't pursue her career, which offends Shidai. Before she can respond, loud alarms suddenly blare outside. These are air raid sirens warning about incoming enemy missiles, prompting everyone to rush to the nearest designated safe area. Moments later, Shidai and her family arrive at the building's underground bunker. Their daughter, Dorsa, carrying her favorite doll, Kimia, immediately runs to play with the other children in the bunker. She whispers something to a boy around her age, and he hands her a small, ball-like object. Curious, Shidai asks Mrs. Fuker, the elderly neighbor, who the boy is. Mrs. Fuker explains that he is the landlord's nephew, who arrived in Tehran only a few days ago. The next morning, Shidai wakes up to find Iraj and Dorsa talking at the dining table. Dorsa claims she heard someone walking in the house during the night and thought it was a jinn, an evil spirit. Iraj consoles her, dismissing the idea that such things are real, and tries to lift her spirits by saying that her doll, Kimia, will look after her at night. However, Shidai notices her husband holding a letter and asks about it. Iraj explains that it's a letter from the government, informing him that he has been drafted to the front lines of the war. He suggests that Shidai take Dorsa to his mother's home in the safer northern part of the country while he is away. Shidai, still upset about his earlier remark regarding her career, replies that she is fully capable of taking care of herself and Dorsa. Taking care of her daughter, Shidai watches as Iraj leaves for his mandatory draft service, bidding his family goodbye. Now, the mother and daughter are left alone in their apartment. The next morning, Dorsa asks her mother if she can sleep with her that night. Shidai senses that her daughter is unusually anxious and asks if something is wrong. After a moment of hesitation, Dorsa admits that she is scared of the jinn, an evil spirit, which is why she can't sleep properly. Shidai sternly tells her that jinn are fictional characters made to scare naughty children. However, Dorsa insists that Mehdi, the new boy she met in the bunker, told her about these evil entities that hurt innocent people. Shidai, now concerned, realizes that Mehdi is the same child she saw in the bunker a few days ago. Later that day, Shidai goes to the landlord's apartment and is greeted by his wife, Mrs. Ibrahimi. She explains that her relative, Mehdi, has been telling Dorsa these scary stories, causing the child to have nightmares at night. However, Mrs. Ibrahimi reveals that Dorsa must have misunderstood, as Mehdi is mute. He had lost his parents in the war several months ago and had not uttered a word since. This revelation leaves Shidai speechless and deeply unsettled. She returns to her apartment, trying to process what she has just learned. That afternoon, Shidai is playing with Dorsa when the phone rings. To her relief, it is Iraj on the other end. He tells her that things are difficult on the front lines but that he is doing fine. He also urges her to take Dorsa to his parents' house in the northern part of the country, as he has heard reports of missiles being launched towards Tehran. Shidi, however, refuses to leave their home based solely on a rumor. After the call, she listens to the news on the radio, which discusses the potential missile attack on Tehran. She is continuously distracted by her daughter, who is in a playful mood. Shidi initially tries to ignore her, but when Dorsa keeps pestering her, she loses her patience. In a moment of frustration, Shidi throws Dorsa's doll, Kimia, across the room and scolds her bitterly. Realizing her anger has gone too far, Shidi quickly softens and apologizes. She gives Dorsa an apple to eat, and they prepare to have lunch together. Suddenly, the entire building begins to shake. Worried, Shidi tells Dorsa to follow her and quickly heads toward the staircase. Dorsa initially obliges, but then runs back to grab her doll, Kimia, which she had forgotten in the living room. A few seconds later, Shidi realizes that Dorsa is no longer behind her. She sprints back to the apartment and finds Dorsa lying unconscious in the living room. Shidi checks her pulse, relieved to find that Dorsa is still alive. The girl soon regains consciousness but begins to sob uncontrollably. She tries to say something to her mother, but before she can, their upstairs neighbor, Noor, bursts into the room. Noor reveals that a missile has struck the building and that her father is seriously injured. She knows that Shidi was once a medical student and begs her to help him. The scene abruptly cuts to Shidi administering CPR to Noor's father, trying desperately to save him. Despite her best efforts, she cannot resuscitate the old man, who ultimately passes away. The Iranian authorities later arrive to retrieve the missile's outer shell from the roof of the apartment complex. Shidi expresses her guilt to Mrs. Fuker, feeling that she could have done more to save the old man's life. However, when they return to the apartment, Shidi notices that a crack has appeared in the roof. As she wonders what to do about it, Dorsa suddenly pulls her arm and leads her to her room. The little girl reveals that Kimia, her beloved doll, is nowhere to be found. Shidi feels a growing sense of dread as she searches the room, realizing that something is terribly wrong. She wonders if the strange occurrences are somehow connected to the missile strike, or if there is something far more sinister happening in their home. Her unease deepens as she tries to keep calm for her daughter, but the tension in the apartment grows, and the shadows of war and mystery begin to close in on them both. Shidi's unease grows as Dorsa reveals that a jinn, an evil spirit, took her favorite doll, Kimia, when the missile struck the building. Shidi, still determined to rationalize things, tells her the jinn do not exist in real life. As she holds her feverish daughter in her arms, she places Dorsa in bed and begins cleaning the apartment. That night, as she cradles Dorsa, she hears her voice coming from the next room. To her shock, Shidi looks down and sees Dorsa still holding Kimia. Her heart races, and she jolts back to reality when Dorsa begins screaming, claiming that a jinn appeared from the crack in the roof and took her doll upstairs. Terrified, Shidi quickly grabs her daughter and rushes back to the bedroom, unsure of what's happening. The next morning, things become even more bizarre. Shidi cannot find the VHS tape of her favorite aerobic exercises, which is odd since she had just seen it. There is barely enough time to search for it before they are visited by their upstairs neighbor, Noor. Noor expresses her gratitude for Shidi's help and reveals that her family is moving to Kurdistan. Before leaving, Noor recounts the last moments of her father's life after the missile hit. She says that her father was completely fine at first and had been talking normally. When she went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, she returned to find him with a stony expression, as if he had seen something strange or paranormal. Without warning, he collapsed and passed away. Shidi tries to rationalize, suggesting that the old man had a heart attack due to the shock of the missile, but Noor seems certain something more sinister occurred. Later that night, Shidi has another nightmare. This time, she sees the apparition of her husband lying next to her in bed. The entity quickly begins choking her, and Shidi wakes up in a cold sweat, terrified of what's real and what isn't. Shidi is haunted by the terrifying experience of seeing a mysterious figure come to take Dorsa. Struggling to free herself from its grip, she manages to yell for help. Shortly after, Mr. and Mrs. Kerr come to check on her, but when they search the room, they find no trace of the entity. Despite their assurances, Shidi is left confused, insisting that the event felt disturbingly real. A few days later, Shida is preparing lunch in the kitchen when she spots the VHS tape of her favorite aerobics workout in the trash. The tape is completely destroyed, and she suspects Dorsa may have been responsible. Going into the living room to confront her daughter, Shida is startled to find Dorsa missing. She rushes outside and finds her daughter desperately knocking on the door of the upstairs apartment. When Shida pulls Dorsa away, the little girl keeps crying that the Jean has taken her doll into the apartment. Back in the apartment, Shida places her daughter in her bedroom, then visits Mrs. Ibrahimi, the landlord. As she hands over the rent, Shida cautiously brings up Dorsa's strange behavior. Mrs. Ibrahimi, a religious woman, suggests that Dorsa may be possessed by a Jean, explaining that these evil spirits travel with the wind, seeking someone to possess. Shida tries to downplay this, explaining that Dorsa is simply feverish and delirious, which is why she believes her doll has been taken upstairs. But Mrs. Ibrahimi insists that if a Jean has taken something precious from someone, that person is marked for life, setting the stage for more terrifying events. Evil spirits, Mrs. Ibrahimi warns, will follow them everywhere if they don't find the lost belongings quickly. Unfortunately, this marks just the beginning of trouble for Shida and her daughter. In the days that follow, the tenants in the apartment complex begin to leave one by one. The Fkers head to Paris, where their son works in a private bank, and Mr. Ibrahimi, the landlord, also decides to leave with his family. Soon, Shida and Dorsa are the only ones left in the building. Initially, Shida had resisted the idea of leaving their home in Tehran, but with everyone else gone, she starts to reconsider. She decides to pack up and move north, where it is relatively safer. However, Dorsa insists that they cannot leave until she finds her doll, Kimia. She ominously declares that she will always be sick if they don't find it. Faced with no other option, Shida agrees to stay behind until the doll is found. Shida searches the apartment thoroughly, growing increasingly frustrated with her daughter for losing it. Eventually, she retrieves the key to her bedside drawer and opens the bottom locker, where she had kept the physiology book her mother gave her. To her relief, the book is still there, but Dorsa's doll is nowhere to be found. That night, the mother and daughter sleep in the same bed for the first time in years. However, Shida wakes up in the middle of the night to find a strange apparition staring at them from the bedroom door. She bolts upright and chases after the entity, but it escapes through a crack in the living room ceiling. This unsettling experience makes Shida realize that they are being haunted by a Jean. The next afternoon, she tapes up the crack in the ceiling as best she can, hoping to stop whatever force is tormenting them. Shida turns the whole house upside down, desperately searching for her daughter's doll, Kimia. Her frustration grows as she cannot find it anywhere, and eventually, all the pent-up fear and anxiety boil over. She shouts at Dorsa and, in a moment of overwhelming emotion, slaps her. In return, the little girl bites her mother's hand. The scuffle between them is interrupted when the entire house shakes once more. They are unsure whether it's the nearby bombing or the Jean shaking the building. That night, Shida goes up to the roof of the building and notices that the hole left by the missile remains uncovered. She peeks into the apartment where Noor once lived through the massive hole and sees a horrifying sight. Her cherished physiology book is lying on the floor. Panicked, Shida rushes back to her apartment and opens her bedside locker. To her horror, the book is missing, replaced by the mutilated body of Dorsa's doll, Kimia. Dorsa, upset, looks at her mother, but Shida bravely tells her that she will fix everything. She tapes the doll back together and hands it to her daughter. As they embrace, the air raid sirens begin to blare once more. The mother and daughter quickly gather their belongings, including the doll, and rush toward the bunker downstairs. Suddenly, they are attacked by the Jean, which has taken the form of a large cloth known as a chador in Persian. Shida struggles to pull Dorsa out from underneath the fabric, managing to free her. Dorsa makes it safely to the stairs, but Shida is trapped, the ground beneath her slowly engulfing her. It seems like all hope is lost until, with incredible bravery, Dorsa stretches out her tiny arms and pulls her mother to safety. Shida turns the whole house upside down, desperately searching for her daughter's doll, Kimia. Her frustration grows as she cannot find it anywhere, and eventually, all the pent-up fear and anxiety boil over. She shouts at Dorsa and, in a moment of overwhelming emotion, slaps her. In return, the little girl bites her mother's hand. The scuffle between them is interrupted when the entire house shakes once more. They are unsure whether it's the nearby bombing or the gene shaking the building.